And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple. The man behind 20-sided adventures, which is a absolute monster of a document as it is, and that's even before you get into the individual classes. The one and only Aron Kearney. How you doing today, man? Or tonight, I guess.
Right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I guess it would be closer to tonight where you are.
Yes, the sun has set over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, give me a few hours. I'll be right there. I'll be right there with you, and then it'll be completely black out. Not dark, just black. But one of the traditions around here is to go into the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, with that in mind, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Okay. My first introduction was back when I was at school. A friend would invite us round once every few months, and we'd just play a random one-shot. None of them really stuck at the time, mainly just because we never played the same game twice. We always tried something different, and none of us, bar the GM, really knew the rules. It changed once I got to university. I joined a LARP society, and through that LARP society, I was introduced to tabletop role-playing games. We started with D&D 3.5, did a small Planescape campaign, and then from there I got introduced to God knows how many different systems. Mm-hmm. And yeah, different campaigns have kept me going.
Mm-hmm. Which, given that, I'd like to play a little bit of a word association. Consider this the worst Rorschach test you'll ever take.
Okay.
So, I'm going to list off a handful of names of different games, and you can tell me if you had played them, if there was a certain experience that came to mind with them, or if you only heard of them.
Sure.
So I'll start with MERP, Middle-earth Roleplay.
Not heard of that one. I've heard of One Ring, and I've heard good things about One Ring. I haven't got to play it myself, but I haven't heard of Middle-earth Roleplaying.
All right. I know it'd be tempting to bring up Warhammer, but that's way too obvious. But fighting fantasy.
Fighting fantasy, yes. As a British school kid, we definitely got a lot of fighting fantasy in our youth, and yes, I did do Warhammer Fantasy, 40k, and AOS, mainly because in true British tradition, every city and town in our country has a Games Workshop. so it's a bit hard to miss it.
Yeah, I I haven't had that. I've had my fair share of LGSs, and some of them I'll run one shots for, um, which is where the birth of the Angry Monk came into being, um, or sometimes the trolley one because I would when Usakar Creed was still a thing, I would abuse the tactical genius rule with him, um, just using land raiders instead of titans because I didn't have any titans.
That's entirely fair.
So somebody's just so they're just marching forward, and then there's like 6 land raiders that just show up out of nowhere. Even worse was when I was using like terminus pattern land raiders, which are solely designed to kill armor. Like that's a very nice vehicle you've got. It'd be a shame if it caught a bad case of explosions. I mean, they do have the risk of blowing up, but you have to roll nothing but ones for that, so that's not happening.
Yeah, no, very rarely at least.
But so one of the obviously one of the other ones I could bring up with this list is, say, Traveler.
Well, I've never played, but I've always been interested, mainly because the tale I was always told about Traveller was the fact that you could kill yourself in character generation, which to me has always been a thing of amazement.
Which is true. I've covered Traveller twice on this channel. Once covering the Mongoose version, and the other covering the Traveller 5 that was done by Mark Miller. I usually steer people more to the Mongoose version because Traveller 5 had navigation issues.
Right.
Like if you put out a full commercial release of something and you don't have bookmarks, I have a problem.
Yeah.
Doubly so if you don't have an index. At that point, you're going full Palladium, and you never go full Palladium. But with 20-sided adventures, I realize that this is a project that's still a work in progress, but
yes,
was this something that was born out of you just house ruling like D&D 3.5 until it became its own thing?
This is born out of more 5e than 3.5. It kind of started with, when would it have been? 2019, 2020? The winter before the OGL crisis. I had been sat there for a while.
2022.
Was that 2022? God, that reason. Then it would have been, winter 2021. I had been running a number of D&D campaigns, and as most GMs end up doing, you start homebrewing things here, there, and everywhere because the system isn't perfect.
Nobody plays.
And I'd originally, and that winter I like to, with GameSign, do just winter is experimentation. I just look at different systems and go, let's throw something at the wall and see what sticks. And so what I had done was kind of start going, maybe I could do some changes to D&D, change a thing here, change a thing there, because there were certain classes I didn't enjoy playing. And then the OGL crisis happened, and all this homebrew that I had made, some of which I had published, I kind of sat there going, this is all kind of a risk. Maybe instead of tinkering with D&D, I should look at writing a system for me to use in my own games to replace D&D. Then, of course, the OGL thing concluded with 5th edition's SRD becoming Creative Commons. And at that point, my life got a whole lot easier because I could reference that system reference document and build off of that rather than trying to be 2 steps to the right and alter my language enough that I couldn't get in legal trouble, but at the same time, I was doing similar things. It was just a lot easier to use the SRD. And I thought it would be a quick project because all I'm doing is adapting someone else's work. I am now 2 years into the process, and we are still ongoing.
You said the famous last words.
What? I thought it'd be a short project.
Yeah. So you kind of set yourself up there. But
Oh yeah. I went to my friends notoriously, hi guys, I'll need some people to help me play test. This was about January or February I said this, and I went, I'll probably start about April, May time. That was I have taken a picture because I always want to remember the hubris and the stupidity of that statement.
no,
Especially as the years continue and I'm still writing.
I'm sure your players have made that point to you as well.
Oh, my friends are far too nice, but admittedly, all my friends. One of the LARP societies we went to at university encouraged members to design games to run for each other and to kind of play test and put forward to run in future terms. So luckily, I have a large friend group who are also games designers, which means they don't often give me ribbings for things like that. Mainly because they're like, yeah, no, we've all done that mistake. We've all started projects and gone, it'll be easy, and then gone, no, it ain't.
I mean, I probably would have, but that's because I believe all men are cremated equal.
That's fair.
I may be an asshole, but I'm an equal opportunity one.
No, that's fair.
But given that, was there any particular? It's first off, I will note that I'm pretty sure the whole Creative Commons thing mainly happened because, one, the blowback that they were getting, and two, the fact that Hasbro was getting shit talked by their own investor publicly.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Because he had publicly stated on social media that pulling this kind of thing mere weeks before Honor Among Thieves was supposed to come out in theaters was a unforced error, and called Wizards of the Coast leaderless, which is probably the most polite middle finger you could give somebody, or 2 fingers depending on your region. And it was, and Honor Among Thieves isn't a bad movie, but it just shows the wrong time to come out. You know, after that whole OGL fiasco, and a couple weeks before Super Mario Brothers would come out.
Yeah, that was poor timing in every sense.
Yeah. And with that in mind, was there a particular ruling or a particular rule that was the straw that broke the camel's back, where you decided I need to start home brewing when it comes to this, or was it just a bunch of little things that gradually added up?
Lots of little things. Definitely lots of little things. Obviously, when I started doing my own system development, it then got to be the big things that I'd always sat there going, I have a problem with this. My big bugbear has always been that. Well, I had 2 big bugbears. One was the class design was not the most engaging. So many classes you look at and you go, I just don't want to play you because you're boring as all hell. And if half of the classes you look at and you go, I think you're boring, then that's a problem.
Was there a particular whipping boy?
Oh, wizard, fighter, barbarian.
Barbarian, that's interesting. Admittedly, and you probably saw this too, the 2 most popular classes seem to be monk and warlock.
Yes.
And
that's because they're interesting. They have so much you can do with them.
I do remember I do remember looking at the one D&D playtest and seeing the Warlock and ranting about that for about 5 minutes because it was such a masterclass in missing the point. They're like, we're turning Warlock into a half caster so they can cast more spells. Like, if you're playing Warlock, you want to be a blaster caster. That's already adding more spells by just making them yet another half caster misses the damn point.
Yep, 100%.
I think that, and I remember seeing a few other things along that, but I can understand why Wizard would be a particular whipping boy, because the whole selling point is more spells. But when everybody's doing plenty of spells and other things, including other full casters, I don't think more spells is really enough.
I personally view it that, because often the line is, oh, we don't give you a class feature at X level because you've unlocked a new level of spell slot. And I'm sat there going, okay, but I've already paid that tax. It was cool I got the spellcaster feature instead of a different feature at stupid early level. Spells are more tools, like a fighter gets more combat maneuvers if you're playing a battle master. You don't sit there and go to the battle master, your remaining tiers of your subclass are, you get more maneuvers, that's it. You're like, we're not going to give you any more features. No, you give them more fun things to do. The same should be true for wizards. You should give them more features that let them customize spells or modify spells or play with spells. Don't just go, you don't need a class feature because you've got more spells. And it's like, no, shut up. That's terrible.
Especially when you compare that Wizard in 5e was probably the biggest offender when it came to dead levels. You know, congratulations, you leveled up. You don't get anything here except numbers go up. Whoop-de-friggin' do. But you look at the other full casters and they're getting plenty of spells and other things. You know, you've got Druid and all of its bullshit. And you've got Cleric and all of its also bullshit. This is why Godzilla was a thing. You know, they're getting spells and they're getting some other tools. And since you brought up Fighter and Barbarian, I'm gonna take a stab in the dark and say that the big problem there was basic attack all day, every day, and that's all they're getting.
100%. Like, the most interesting fighter is the Battle Master, which is why everyone always asked when 1D&D was happening. The one request everyone made was, could we not get more? Could we not have Battle Master maneuvers be part of the core class? And Wizards went, no, because we want it to be your intro class. We want it to be simple for new players. I'm sat there going, but there's a Barbarian right there. If you want to have someone without maneuvers, go get them to play Barbarian.
You want to know what's funny about that? Maneuvers were part of core during the playtest. Like during D&D Next, there was a whole maneuver system for all of the martial classes. The idea was, much like how every class has its own spell, every casting class has its own spell list. Every martial class had its own maneuver list. Things like Bull Rush were a maneuver, Flurry of Blows was a maneuver, Cleave was a maneuver, so on and so forth. You'd get a set of martial die you could use to either boost attack, boost damage. I would homebrew that you could boost defense with them. You'd essentially treat them like lands in Magic the Gathering. You'd spend them, and you'd get it back at the start of your next turn. And instead, a lot of that was truncated into the Battle Master archetype, and not only that, but completely missed the point of that. Plus, if I'm being honest, and maybe you came to the same conclusion, the idea of Fighter needing to be the basic character I feel like that's missing. That not only is that missing the point, it's also cutting into the fantasy.
Yeah.
Because let's say somebody was a huge fan of any film you've seen in the last 40 years that involved a whole lot of swordplay, and they want to bring that to their character. You know, all of the parries, ripostes, footwork, all that stuff, whether it be Star Wars, whether it be Conan, whether it be Pirates of the Caribbean, whether it be Zorro, take your pick. And they try and bring that into something like 5e, or even its predecessors, and it's just basic attack. I know some will say, well, you can roleplay. It's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, all you're doing is just basic attack. If it's the same result, no matter how much you describe it, that kind of takes the air out of the tires, as it were.
Yeah. Like, anyone can roleplay, generally, a class to do saying you can roleplay a class to be more interesting than it isn't really a good argument, because that is true for every class. Every class can be made more interesting with a unique character idea and build. And I always encourage that. That's great. But that shouldn't be used as an excuse for going, why is this mechanically dull as a brick? It's why with the martials, each one, we aimed that there was always something you could do. So our version of Barbarian, you pick the emotion that you want to roleplay with. And some of them let you play kind of a tank where you're controlling the battlefield, people want to attack you, and you're providing support buffs to your allies. Or you can go all for the damage and just make yourself a target by the fact that if they don't try and target you, they're just all going to die to your high damage numbers. Mm-hmm. Fighter has their combat maneuvers, which is a bit like Battlemaster, as I said. It's purely to give you that tactical feel of, you have an opener, then you have these general steps, and then you have a finishing move that concludes the action and lets you do a bit of damage, do a good amount of damage based on how many steps you've performed before. Mm-hmm. Monk performs like a Street Fighter character, in that in each turn you're trying to get your combos off to get as many actions as you can in that turn. You know, we're trying to spice it up to make each class, each of the martials feel like each of the spellcasters, in that they perform the same role, but they're all getting to do it in a different style, in a different mechanical way, to help. Because otherwise it's just, well, I attack you, but I'm angry, or I attack you, but I'm basic, or I attack you, and I get to do it with my fists.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't feel fun.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, one of the things that I did notice was instead of putting the classes into the core document, you have them in their own playbooks, and those are big ass playbooks.
The reason was that I started with everything in the core rules, then it got too big for Google Drive to display the document, so then I split them into playbooks, and that solved the problem. Mm-hmm. Then it got too big again, so I had to move all the character generation stuff out, which the character generation is quite a large number of pages because the way ancestries work.
Yeah.
Because each ancestry is 10 features that you can pick up to 5.
So this is a case where your choice of race, ancestry, etc. matters beyond just first level.
Yeah, so how Ancestry works is you start the game with 3 Ancestry features, and when you hit level 5, you can get an extra 2. Mm-hmm. But there are feats that you can take that will give you more, and then there are templates which allow you to do things like go, I am touched by hell.
And
rather than it being like, this is the Hell Touch race and this is the Angelic race. It's any of the ancestries can have a template applied that lets them be touched by the heavens or the hells or eldritch horrors. And you basically can replace some ancestry features with those template features.
Yeah.
To give you that customizability. The problem with customizability is it takes a lot of pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine taking several hundred pages for customizability. Wouldn't be me.
I've seen that Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, but since you brought up feats, I'll bring that up, because when I did my initial review of 5e a long time ago in my old format, one of the things that I said that I use as a crux of my missing the point argument was how feats were handled. As the whole ASI alternative, I had felt that missed the point of why feats were a thing to begin with.
Yep.
Because feats were an evolution of the proficiencies thing that was introduced in AD&D 2nd. And it was very specifically stated that it was a means to customize your character. Choosing between having to choose between a stat improvement and a feat, I felt missed the point. I'm well aware of the argument of, well, there were too many feats back in 3rd. Yes, I won't deny that. There were too many feats. The feat tax was a problem. The fact that some of them had whole chains that you had to plan multiple levels in advance, looking at you, Whirlwind Attack, was certainly a problem. But that's a pendulum that swings both ways. And it's like saying that you're fighting against deforestation by burning down a forest, just so that the loggers can't cut down the trees. I mean, you succeeded, but you kind of missed the point.
No, that's entirely fair.
Or, imagine somebody wanting a Disney princess doll for Christmas and you give them a Princess Leia action figure. You're technically correct, but you're still wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that several of the classes in D&D have what I referred to as feats in all but name only validated me on that front. Like, say, the evocations that Warlock has. Like, a lot of those evocations, they're means of customization. They're basically feats, but they can't call them feats.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
They're very specific kind of feats. But same with fighting styles. Well, we can see that fighting styles are a bit like feats, because in 2024 they've decided to make all fighting styles a feat, and you're like, well,
that is stupid. But then again, for anybody who's got any actual talent when it comes to writing D&D is probably writing their own third-party stuff instead of writing directly under Wizards. So they're left with the replacement guys. But with 20-sided adventures, are you given the fact that you have feats at certain level thresholds? I'm guessing that there's significantly more options for getting feats to enhance a given playstyle.
Yes. So what we did was, firstly, whenever you would get a level, whenever in traditional D&D you would get to a point where it goes pick an ASCII or pick a feat, we give you both. So you get to increase one of your traits by 1.
Mm-hmm.
We don't use -4 to 20 system. I can't remember what the number scale is for D&D, but we don't use that. We just use the modifiers.
Yeah, you're using a straight modifier like True 20 did back in the day.
So you also, basically, when you level up, you get to increase a trait by 1 to a maximum of 5,
mm-hmm.
and you get a feat. There are feats with level prerequisites, so you can't get every feat at starting, but there are fighting style feats, which are a bit like fighting styles that martials are used to, but one thing we said was that every fighting style should have an action attached to it. So if you've picked, I will give you an example. Do you have I don't know when the last time you played D&D was, but was there a fighting style that any of your martial characters particularly like?
There would always be somebody who wanted to dual wield in some form. But if I'm being honest, the most common fighting style was GWF, Great Weapon Fighter.
Yeah, so Great Weapon Fighter was you would get the basic thing, which is when you roll a 1 or a 2 on the damage die, you get to re-roll it.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also get the option for Heavy Strike, which was when you take the attack action, you can reduce the number of attacks you make by 1, but your damage die effectively get advantage. Mm-hmm. So if you know, for example, that you're a paladin, you're going to smite with this hit, you've put all the buffs to get this attack to hit, then you would potentially want to do a Heavy Strike, which means you're foregoing your extra attack, but you get advantage on your damage dice, so you're guaranteed to get more damage out of this hit that you really want to strike.
Yeah.
Duelist's action is they get to disarm.
Mm-hmm.
It's stuff like that.
Yeah. Since you brought up advantage, I did want to ask one thing. In your system, could advantage stack?
It stacks in the instead of it being so. In 5e, it's say you had 3 sources of disadvantage and 1 of advantage. They all cancel out. In this system, if you had 3 disadvantage and 1 advantage, you would just roll with disadvantage because you would count up. You would go, well, we've got 1 of each. They cancel out. I've got 2 more disadvantage. We've got disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
I did consider trying to mechanize it further, but I thought I'd keep that bit simple because there are already lots of other weird bits to the system.
Yeah. I can certainly get that, and I do find it interesting that one of the things you had in the core document is psionic powers, and part of the reason I find that interesting is, and I did a whole thing on the Geek Watch podcast talking about this. That psionics has been one of those things that seems to struggle whenever you try and put it in a fantasy setting. Because you either have it be too powerful or not powerful enough. And then there was 5e's take, which was trying to force it onto other casting classes and say, oh, psychics are just wizards who cast with their mind, which isn't the fantasy.
Yes.
But it looks like you have it that it is using a point system, but it has its own set of rules. It's not just spell casting in a different coat of paint.
It uses the base spell casting system, but it has alterations. So you can ignore verbal components. You can psychic powers cannot interact with spells. Mm-hmm. So things that cancel out spells will not cancel out powers. Things that cancel out powers will not cancel out spells. Mm-hmm. I'm currently in the middle of redesigning powers, so they're a bit more programmable. So whereas with a spell you would go, I cast Fireball at 3rd level, but if I cast it at 4th level, I add some d6. And it says in the spell that every time I add a spell slot, it does this. With psionic powers, what I'm looking at is potentially doing it that you can put more psi points into it, but it will be things like you can increase the range by this much, you can increase the damage die by this. So it gives you more editable of the base aspects of the power.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to subclasses, I do remember talking about that and how it ends up carrying the message that your class doesn't really get interesting until you get your subclass. Sometimes with some, you get it right out of the gate. With others, you get it later. How are you handling subclasses? Do they get them at different levels depending on class, or is there something else going on?
So I remember one of the original things when they talked about D&D was the idea that if you got your subclass at level 1, that's because your subclass should define the core class. If you got it level 3, it's because the subclass should add to the class but not define it. I've kind of stuck with that, but that's mainly because we've gone a little bit further with some of the ones at level 1. So, for example, at level 1, if you're a cleric, part of that is you are designing your god. Part of the level 1 aspect of being a cleric is you have to design your god. You pick what domains are theirs, and these kind of things get referenced throughout. Warlocks, we want you to know what your patron is, because a lot of your class features refer to you basically being able to at times ask your patron for a favour to get some power, or doing things like manifesting a mark of your patron on your body that, depending on who you're interacting with, could help you in a social situation. It could also make it worse, but that's its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas classes that get it level 3 are like fighters, where at level 1 we're giving you quite a lot of things to have to worry about mechanically, and your subclass will enhance your class, but it won't define it. Because you will get some special maneuvers tied to your subclass, but it doesn't drastically alter the very nature of your character. Sorcerer, I think, is the biggest one that's an example of your subclass dictates every aspect of your core class's abilities.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to kind of go over some of the classes that you've made playbooks for, kind of get a feel for their particular playstyle, what they might be equivalent to in 5e, and what would change going from one to the other.
I can do that.
And now, obviously, there's 16 class playbooks that you've released so far, so there's going to be some that probably don't have as obvious of an equivalent as others. But I'm going to go from top to bottom. Starting with Arcanist.
Arcanist is the wizard. You get a spell book. The big changes is... So one thing we have done is, while I said at level... Some classes will get their subclass at level 3, some will get theirs at level 1, is there is always a choice at level 1, even for the classes that do not have a subclass. So for Arcanist, they get to pick a spell school. And if they pick a spell school, they get to add some of those spells to their spell book, no matter what spell list it's from.
Mm-hmm.
They also get some extra little features to assist them in casting spells, especially of that spell school. Their big difference is they play a lot with modifying spells, editing spells, so they can alter aspects of a spell to reduce or heighten its circle that they first unlock, if I recall, about levels 7 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
At level 2 you get some fun toys to play with arcane foci. You can pick an arcane foci you prefer, so you could pick the staff or the wand, and say the wand gives you an attack roll bonus to your cantrips, whereas the staff, you can apply touch range cantrips through it. So if you had a polearm effect that would maybe increase the reach of your staff, you could bop someone a little bit further away to deliver a touch cantrip through.
Bard.
Oh boy, Bard. Bard perfectly matches what it's called. It's the Bard. its big thing is you pick if you are a spellcaster or not. So Bard has two choices. You either can be a leader, which means you get the same number of cantrips you would get. You instead get actions called feats of leadership, which are things like you can command an ally who can use their reaction to get an extra movement on your turn, or to make an attack, or to do a different action.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can be a spellcaster. You still have magical secrets, but what happens is if you're taking feats of leadership, you're getting some spells off any of the spell lists, and you get a free cast. You can cast it once a day without an issue, whereas if it's magical secrets, you also get to expand your spell list knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Bar that, most of the core class is just upgrading your bardic inspiration, your feats of leadership, or your spells, or just other support effects.
I can get that. Battle Channeler.
Battle Channeler is the barbarian. So its thing is you get to pick an emotion. There are 5 emotions that we call dream emotions and 5 nightmare emotions tied to which part of the realms of the dream you draw your power from. Low leveled, you channel emotion in much the way that you're used to, but as you level up, you will get extra damage types tied to your emotion. You can use a trait other than physique for your attack and damage rolls based off the emotion that you've chosen. You get barriers that you can put up. They were partially inspired by Dark Knight from FF14, so you can do things. You basically get a Blackest Night.
Mm-hmm.
And much like Barbarian, you are chasing critical hits to get off larger attacks. The one thing to note for this system compared to D&D 5e is if you score 10 above a target's hit target, which is the equivalent of AC, you automatically score a critical hit with a weapon attack or unarmed strike. So there is a bit less randomness to critical hits if you're fighting weaker targets, or if you're able to stack your attack roll bonuses high enough.
Mm-hmm. All right, I can get that. Eternalist.
Eternalist is cleric. So the one thing is you will build an eternal. All gods are eternals. Not all eternals are gods. Eternals in our system is anything that you can pray to. So if you pray to a great old one, if you pray to a devil, whatever you pray to, it can be an eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And this will affect things like the damage type of your spells. It can, when you're doing your channel divinities, you have one ability that will aid the chosen entity type that is blessed by your eternal. So for many players, I assume they would choose humanoid. And then you have a nemesis entity type, which you turn. So instead of just turning undead, you turn whatever in the lore of your world your god hates. And you will heal whatever your god likes.
I am glad that that's present, because I've often asked that kind of thing, and the counter I get is, well, in early D&D there's the implication of them being vampire hunters, which to that I say that just goes right back to the whole shit or get off the pot when it comes to setting.
Yep. And there are other channel divinity options that are given as a list, and when you build your eternal, you build the list of these actions, and then as you level up, you might get access to more. One thing that you get at level 3 will be a choice of what do you worship, because some people like to go that they worship one god, some people like to worship gods in a pantheon, and there are some people who like to go, well, actually my person worships a philosophy or a concept. And what we did was we kind of went, okay, pick one of those 3 things to be, and depending on which you pick, you will get an effect. So for example, if you picked a single deity, you will get the first level subclass effect of a different domain of your god. If you're in a pantheon, you will have adjacent gods, and you get the first domain subclass of that other god.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds weird, but one thing we did do, because Some people like to use subclasses because they fit a character fantasy. With subclasses, every subclass has 4 tiers. So I know Bard in D&D has 3 subclass levels.
Mhm.
Everyone has 4. Your first is either at first and third, then everyone gets their second at 6th, everyone gets their third at 10th, and everyone gets their fourth at 14th.
Mhm.
What you can do is you can either increase the tier of a subclass you have, or you can take a first tier of a different subclass for your class. So, if, for example, say you really like this subclass, but the 4th tier doesn't really jive with the class fantasy that you have, you could take a tier of a different subclass. So, which is why the Eternalist kind of works, because what it does is it gives you more subclasses that you can then go, actually, I'm going to get a tier in that other one tied to this other god that mine's attached to, based on the setting of the world.
Yeah, I can get that. So then there's Inventor. I'm guessing that's this game's incarnation of the Artificer fantasy.
Yeah, it is. We have made a crafting system, and so we made a class to work with that crafting system. You are just really good at crafting.
Which does bring a question that's created a bit of contention. Would your version of it with the Inventor, is that one that can is the Investor a half caster?
Yes.
All right. So, but I get the feeling that it's one of those cases where you're picking Inventor more for being the gadgeteer or being the crafter more than its casting abilities.
Yes. The spell casting is just to give you some more support utility in the field, and because crafting is not a quick process. So,
yeah, I can get that. Now
comes the fun.
Yeah, the Lore Master is the next one on my list.
Yeah, Lore Master does not have a D&D equivalent. So basically, how I viewed it was you have cosmic magic, which is in D&D terms your arcane magic. At the far end, you have wizard. In the middle, you have fighter. There should probably be a half caster in the same way that you have cleric, paladin, fighter, and you have druid, ranger, fighter. So Lore Master is our answer to that. It is the arcane half caster. It's why they get spell school specialization and foci specialization like an arcanist.
So they're the Gish.
Yeah. They can pick between. They will always have some cantrips, and they will also have what's known as tactical maneuvers, which act like a fighter's maneuvers, but often with more of a leadership style. So a bit like the Bard's feats of leadership, they kind of harken back to 4E's Warlord class. But they also play a bit in the Red Mage field, in that they like to teleport and fuck around with spells.
Which, whenever people try and channel the Warlord from 4E, I always laugh because everybody keeps telling me that 4E was an absolute disaster and nothing good came of it, yet they keep trying to make the Warlord in that.
Yeah. I did not get to play 4E, and I feel very sad about that because I keep looking at it going, is it really as bad as everyone says it is? Because it looks quite cool.
Yeah, I've looked at people. I've played plenty of 4E, and I've dealt with people's talk about how they act like it's the worst thing ever. And to some of them, I said, "Motherfucker, you used that exact argument word for word in 2000 regarding 3rd edition. So, get fucked with a pipe." But I mean, think things like they're turning into tabletop WoW, and I'm like, you were saying that 3rd edition was turning D&D into Diablo, despite the fact that there were Diablo modules in AD&D. So make up your mind in that case.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that it keeps coming back is because it scratched an itch that people didn't know they wanted scratched.
Yeah.
Because
I just find it interesting it's having a resurgence now. Like, everyone's suddenly going, actually, 4E wasn't so bad. And you're sat there going, really? Did you say that a few years ago? Or are you just saying it because you don't like what D&D is currently? And so the previous thing is like, actually, we were too harsh on you. It's like,
whenever they say, people. Oh, we were too harsh on 4E, it's like, and I wasn't harsh enough on you. Because I will be that petty. But I think it's also the fact that the fantasy of the warlord is that frontline battlefield commander. The drive me closer, I want to hit them with my sword kind of thing. And I've seen some argue that one could do that in the past with the bard, but it's not the same. No. I mean, because the bard is going to be tied to magic in one form or another, so that kind of undercuts it. And before that, there was the marshal back in the 3E miniatures handbook.
Or you heard Tome of Battle.
Yeah, which I remember all of the screeching that people did at me because I liked Tome of Battle. Because with the argument of, oh, it's fighters stepping on mages' toes, as if the mages aren't stepping on everybody's toes already.
I was gonna say, I swear, 3.x, if it's anything like 5e, definitely had some spells to make spellcasters really good at melee fighting.
It's worse than that, because one spell that I had banned in some of my past campaigns was knock, because I felt that the presence of knock completely undercut rogues.
That's very fair. Yeah,
like that, and there were plenty of others that either stepped on the toes of the GM's narrative control, like say teleport or scry, necessitating having spells specifically to counteract that, and thus adding to the spell bloat. Or you have cases of spells that just completely invalidate a whole other character. And that was definitely one of them. There's other ones, but knock was the one I always pointed to. Or, if I'm being honest, you have the problem of the ranger being completely outdone in everything it could do by the druid.
Yeah.
And the Gish is a common fantasy, and I've seen people say that that's the reason for half casters. But the problem is, if it's just a GIMP version of another class's spells, it needs to have something to even that out, something that the full caster can't do. And
well, one thing I will say is every half-caster, because this will come up again, every half-caster at second level gets to pick. They do not have to be a half-caster if they do not want to. So the Lawmaster will always have cantrips, and it will always have some tactical maneuvers, but at second level they can either be a half-caster, they can get a magic sword, or they can get more tactical maneuvers and focus on that. And all of the half-casters have subclasses. There are 3 subclasses in each half-caster. One tied to each of those choices that either will let you get that subclass's choice if you didn't pick it, or if you did pick it, it will give you a bonus. I'll go more into that on the Realm Walker, because that one is a very obvious one, but yeah, so a Lawmaster doesn't have to be a half-caster if they don't want to. But if they do, they get access to spells, which are pretty damn good.
But if they choose to be a half-caster, they're getting something else.
Yeah.
Which is a fair trade-off, I'd say. Now, next on the list is martial artist. I'm guessing that's this game's incarnation of the monk.
Yeah. So how that one works is alongside. So one is your unarmed strike die will increase as you go.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we've said is, if you like using monk weapons, that is fine. We will allow that class fantasy. And what we say is, if your martial arts weapon damage die would be smaller than your unarmed strike die, it uses your unarmed strike die. So if, I know, you've got... we have the meteor hammer, which I think is like a D8. If the meteor hammer is a D8 but your unarmed strikes are a D10, it will increase its damage to a D10. But when you make unarmed strikes, you get to roll a second die called the martial arts die, which is always one die size smaller than in your unarmed strike die.
Mm-hmm.
And that die gives you combo points. You can spend those combo points in a similar way to how Monk would spend ki to do special actions. So you can do flurry of blows, patient defense. You can make your strikes poisonous or dazing.
Mm-hmm.
And each subclass gives you additional special actions. So if you take the Way of the Performer, which is a wrestling subclass, in that subclass you get to pick a role, like you're the heel, you're the face. One of your special actions is, I change my role in the middle of a fight to gain this other role's benefits to help me in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more, we wanted it that the warrior would be this, I pre-plan what I am going to do in my turn based off this flow of battle, whereas a martial artist's more, I'm just going to hit you and we're going to see how far we can go. I'm a bit like Street Fighter doing your combo.
Mm-hmm.
You might stall, you might not get quite as many points you were hoping for, so you've got to quickly change attack, but it might be that you get to pay that finishing move and knock out whoever your opponent is.
Yeah, that's certainly more in keeping. Especially since there, at some point, monks became this kind of quasi-caster with the way key abilities developed, and I don't think that's the fantasy per se. I know that. Plus, there were infamous subclasses like the Way of Four Elements that has been bullied by everybody.
Yeah. If you pick something, there is a Way of the Four Elements, and there is a spirit. Because one thing we didn't want it to be is, we wanted martial artists to be, if you want to be a wrestler, if you want to be a Greek pugilist, if you want to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can. If you want to do whatever it is Keanu Reeves does when he's doing John Wick with the guns, you can do. If you want to do more of an Eastern martial art, you also can do that, but you're not automatically being this aesthetic Far Eastern monk with this spiritualist nature. You opt into that class fantasy if you are wanting to play a more faith-focused monk. And so we do give you a spiritualist subclass, and we give you a primal elemental subclass. But they are quarter casters in the same way Eldritch Knight is for the warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have spell slots, you play the spell game, you can do that fantasy on its side thing, but you're also getting to punch people.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to try and mix that because that just gets a bit messy.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, the next one on the list is Oathsworn, and I'm guessing Oathsworn is akin to Paladin.
Yep. So its change is you get your subclass at level 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like with half-casters at level 2, you will get to pick either spellcasting, a holy sword, or a faithful companion, which is basically like Find Steed.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, very focused on tanking. You get your auras. Smite you will get at level 3. Smite, we slightly looked at how Rogue during the 1D&D playtest was treating its sneak attack, where you get your sneak attack die and you can reduce it for an effect.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of Oathsworn having to be a spellcaster and have to get all of these smite spells, what we instead said was there are going to be no smite spells. They will each be an aspect of the divine smite feature, and as you level, your smite damage gets bigger. and you can reduce the die to instead apply a different effect, which then changes the damage type and does something extra, like terrify an enemy, set them on fire, frighten them, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Which I can certainly get. It also means that there's, I don't know, there's probably somebody who's doing a Palaver or a Sorkeldin, Paladin Sorcerer combos, which was the notorious thing I would abuse because, you know, Smite takes up spell slots, so pair it up with the class that gets a bunch of spell slots, so you can smite while you smite.
You can use spells to buff your smite, but you do have to take the spell casting feature to do it. So you have to kind of go, I don't want a fancy sword, I'm going to have to be a spellcaster if I want to buff my smite with spells.
Yeah.
So, but you know, that's a choice you are making in customizing your character.
Now, the next one I have on the list is Packbound, and I'm guessing Packbound is the successor to Warlock.
Yep.
As I mentioned, Warlock's always been a fairly popular thing, especially with that whole auto-scaling spell, which it looks like you still have, though they can get spell slots at higher levels.
Yeah. So you kind of always got a spell slot at higher levels. I can't remember what the hell the feature was called, but it got a bit weird. So what we instead did was we just kind of went, you can have some high level spell slots in a more traditional sense. They still have they scale, so I believe it's 11th level you get Eldritch spell casting and you get one spell slot at 6th, and then that spell slot increases its level like a pack magic slot does, but it's purely for the high level spells. It might be broken. That's what playtests are for. I'd like to give people the toys and see how it's used. It may be that it's broken, but at the same token, when you get to high level with spellcasters, you're already doing crazy things, and that's one thing I did forget to mention. Arcanist Capstone is they get a 10th level spell slot, which no one else gets.
Which is
so wizards get to really wizard.
Yeah. Which is a good way of establishing that differentiation between them and the other casters. But obviously the next one, Scion, it's
psychic.
Yeah, that's psychic. I know I complained about what happened with psychics, but the funny thing is, in the Unearthed Arcana stuff, there was
the
psychic, the mystic that they were tooling around with, but I guess it was too entertaining, so they killed it off.
Yeah, the mystic had the problem of they made it that you could take whatever discipline you wanted from the subclasses. And the thing was, each subclass's disciplines kind of trod on the toes of a different class. And in letting you pick from the full buffet menu, what it meant is you got to tread on the toes of every single class and have an answer for every problem. But I think it would have been fine if they developed it further. This was born from the fact that when I was doing D&D, one of my players wanted to play a Mystic, and I said, okay, wizards have abandoned this class. They have said it is dead, and they will not touch it again. So I'm going to take it and develop it for you, which is what we did.
Yeah. And when it comes to, if their argument was, it's stepping on everybody's toes, again, I will bring up, you already have that problem with other classes, and you're letting that slide, so what gives? Can't have it both ways.
One thing we did was make it that each subclass has a specialized power list. So in the core rules, you'll see like core psionic powers, and then there are these weird order lists. Those are tied to the subclasses of the psion. And each one has a focus. Like there's Soulfire, whose thing is, I want to cast damaging powers, and I will spend my hit points to do it. Or you have the Azure, who is based off of the Blue Mage, because I love that class fantasy of watching an enemy's attacks and going, I'm going to copy that.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. And I do appreciate that with some of the setup you have with psychic is that there is an element of risk to messing around with psychic powers, and you can't fully. Are you familiar with the term Nova?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't Nova, you can't Alpha Strike too much, otherwise you can do it, but you are taking a risk in doing so.
Yeah.
And having that risk backfire, which makes them perfect for people who like to play wild mages.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that when it came to developing the Scion, there was an emphasis made to make it so that Scions are not necessarily spellcasters.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we wanted psionics to be slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there are subclasses that will let you do psionics. So, the warrior, the monk, and the rogue get a subclass each that lets them dabble with psychic powers. But the key thing is when they do it, it's very much like, so for example, the monk, their combo points at the start of their turn, they look at how many combo points they have, and that's how many side points they'll get. Warrior gets to roll their combat step die. Mm-hmm. It's very random, it's very uncontrolled. Whereas the Scion is, you've chosen to take a class in it, you are more controlled in it than any other class.
Mm-hmm. I can get that.
But you get to experiment. So at third level, you either get to be a soul, which is you use your psychic powers to support people. Mind, which is you are really good at psychic powers and you can expend these die to just increase the damage of your powers. Or there is body, which is I want to touch into body horror and like grow claws or grow wings or whatever I need in the moment to deal with this problem. I will warp my body to do so.
Mm-hmm. Now, the next one on the list is Realm Walker, which I'm guessing
Ranger.
Ranger. Ranger is a class that has been cursed since day one, for various reasons. Even going back to the AD&D days, where Ranger was made of glass and Ranger Down became a running joke. There's some speculation that the easy deaths of Rangers was why at death's door rules started to become a thing. I don't know if that was the case, but I could see it happening.
No, it's fair. Realm Walker, so where to start with this one? So its big thing is much like with the Druid, they both get a roleplay heavy effect, which is you start to form bonds with the world around you. Mm-hmm. In a Realms Walker's case, they form bonds with the different realms of realities. They form bonds with the realm of fire, the realm of death, the realm of dreams. Mm-hmm. So at first level, you'll pick one of those realms, and it basically gives you a damage type, terrain, and a creature type. And you get bonuses in fighting those enemies, recalling knowledge about those enemies, traveling in that terrain type. So it kind of conflates the favoured terrain and favoured enemy. But the one key thing is we give you... So with spellcasting, there are spells, there are powers, and there are rights. Rights are these roleplay-heavy skill challenges where you can do... There are certain kind of spells that never felt quite right being a spell where it's just, I spend an action, bam, this thing happens. It's more like you want to spend minutes with incense and do this whole ritual kind of aspect to it. So those are rights. And one of the rights a Realm Walker gets for free is they can form bonds with realms as they travel. Which then means, say for example, you start a campaign by the sea and you go, cool, I'm going to meld with the realm of water. Oh, what's that? Our campaign has sent us to Stradland and we're dealing with undead. Well, crap. Hey, GM, maybe give me a portal to the realm of death and we can maybe do a ritual to meld me to that, and then I can have some stuff to deal with the undead and keep that usability going. It is also worth noting with this, we have brought back from 4E the mark condition. Basically, a number of the marshals focus on marking targets for different effects. So, for example, the tanking characters may have it where if they mark a target, they have disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone but them. With the Realm Walker, we took Hunter's Mark and we just made it that you can mark someone, and while marked, you are dealing this extra damage. It's not a spell, it doesn't need concentration, it's just a condition that you can apply to people, and you can only do it one person at a time. But when you mark someone, you get all of the benefits. It's if a creature type is from a realm that you have bonded to, they are always considered marked. So if, say, you're doing an anti-undead campaign and you bond with the Realm of Death, all undead are considered marked by you because you have trained and you know how to deal with the undead, which will give you a bonus to damage and other effects as you level. Your level 2 choice is you can be a spellcaster, because I know not everyone likes to be a spellcaster as a ranger. You can get an animal companion, or you get survival training, which lets you be a bit more Aragon. You can go into the wild, you know how to build traps. You have bonuses to using herbs for medicine. You have keen senses, that kind of thing.
Are we talking Aragon, or are we talking Rambo?
Depends how you want to play it. And then this is where I've got a perfect example of, if you pick the subclass that is tied to the primal companion choice at level 2, if you pick spellcasting or survival training, great, you get animal companion. If you picked animal companion at level 2 and you pick the subclass, you get a second animal companion because it is rewarding you for really wanting to double down on having an animal companion, so you get 2.
I heard you like animal companions, so we gave you an animal companion with your animal companion, so you can sick them while you sick them.
If you really want to focus on it, we will give you the tools that you can do that for days. If you want to be a bit more versatile, we will also give you the tools to do that for days. The half-casters, all, I should also have mentioned this earlier, have an ability called Trait of Power. I don't like Mad. I get that some people are like, oh, Mad's good because it helps balance things. I'm like, no. So what happened was each of the half-casters gets what they call a Trait of Power at level 1. And that determines what they use for their attack rolls and damage rolls, what they use if they pick spellcasting, and a bunch of their other features key off it. So, for example, Realm Walker is knowledge or intuition, so int or wisdom. Paladin was determination or intuition, so wisdom or charisma. And Lawmaster was knowledge or charisma.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the next one, the Slayer, this is one where...
The Slayer is the half-caster for a Warlock.
Yeah.
Which is a really... which I thought was a fun thing to try and do. Slayer is... Slayer was born by the fact that I really like Dragon Age, and I wanted a class that's a bit like Grey Wardens, which is this kind of class where you have to do this really dangerous ritual that makes you really good at killing this one supernatural threat, because you have kind of infected yourself with a bit of that supernatural threat.
I suppose one could also channel a bit of the archetype of the vampire hunter who is a vampire or a half vampire. You know, your Alucards, your Ds, your Blades, that kind of thing.
Yep. Any fantasy where basically it's to kill a thing, I have to become the thing, that is what the Slayer is there for. So they each, again, it's a subclass you get at level 1. Their thing is your powers have a chance to trigger this effect where your inner darkness, the inner supernatural threat inside you, comes out and a roleplay effect occurs, as well as a mechanical effect. So you've got things like Dragon Slayer, You've got Cryptid Slayer, where you get to design what kind of weird cryptid in your world did you gain the abilities of. You've got Vampire Slayers, you've got Masked Slayers, which is the equivalent of demons for us. You've got Angel Slayers. Their half-caster abilities are they either get a weapon with a bound version of this supernatural thing they tried to kill. You can do blood magic, or you can do half-casting pact magic.
Yeah. In one of the settings I had written, one particular archetype was what's known as the Censor, which are essentially mage police, because in that setting, blood magic is very, very illegal, and if you're caught doing it, a Censor is usually going to be sent out to deal with you. And their whole thing was having swords that don't deal physical damage, but can damage one's ability to cast magic. And trying to get that to work in, say, 5e was a nightmare.
I could see that.
But with here, it would be significantly easier because you have a Mage Slayer order. So...
Yep.
So,
and if someone goes, actually, I don't like your version of Mage Slayer, to know, I'm like, yeah, sure. I have no problem with people customizing the subclasses or making new subclasses to better fit their world.
Yeah.
Because the thing with Slayers is they're so... I've tried to go with some very generic ones, but in reality, they will always be very setting dependent. So it's one of those classes where I'd definitely be like, make your own. Do you want to hunt something in your world? Do it. Make a Slayer order. Have fun.
Yeah. Now, with that said, with the soul shaped, is that basically the
that is the sorcerer.
Oh, this one's the sorcerer.
Yeah. So soul shaped. I a long time ago had made a subclass for sorcerer that kind of touched on this. I've always been a bit bloodlines are great, but they can also sometimes lead to some really odd / iffy things depending on how edgy the person decides they want to be with it. So how soul shape works is instead it's your soul at some point has had another entity soul kind of touch it, like a dragon or an angel or a god or something like that, and your soul has been irrevocably changed. And so, as you progress through the class, your body literally changes to better reflect this force that has altered your soul, reflecting it in your body. So when you start, you'll look like you, but by the time you end, for example, the cosmic soul-shaped, you look like a field of stars. A dragon soul-shaped will look a lot like a dragon.
Why am I thinking of Moon Knight?
I have not watched Moon Knight.
I haven't watched it either. I'm referring to the comic. I refuse to watch the MCU version of it because I know they'll never get it right.
Yep.
But when Warren Ellis had his run with the comics, which the Russian Comic Book Geek did a very good job of portraying in motion comic form.
Right.
There's the implication that he doesn't have DID like he's always thought, but rather brain damage just by him trying to make sense of Khonshu's different aspects that he has to embody.
Right.
And that's inadvertently the reason for his multiple personalities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's also created a bit of a thing where there was a big do not enter hit when it comes to him and psychics, because anytime a psychic tries to go into his head, they don't come out the same way.
Yeah, I can see that. that does feel like one that psychic would not have had a fun time with.
Well, one of them tried, and he ended up a blubbering mess as if he just saw Cthulhu afterwards.
Yeah. So as you're leveling through this class, it's one of the reasons it very much needed the subclass at level 1. So each subclass has a template or an ancestry tied to it, so that as you level, it will refer to that to kind of help determine things like entity type, size category, and give you some extra features that you can pull to customize your character further. But as you also progress, it will go, please reference your subclass. And at the back of each subclass, there is a list of when you get to a certain class feature, this is what happens to you. In addition to your subclass features.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it hasn't been released yet publicly, but currently I'm experimenting with making it a spell point system class at the same time, because Sorcerer has this really weird thing in that you have 2 resources you care about. You have sorcery points and you have spell slots, and they can convert between each other. So I'm currently experimenting with going, what if we just made the entire class sorcery points? Which then meant that the resource that you are using to cast spells is also the resource used for meta magic, which is also the resource used for other class features. And seeing how that works. It might not work, but we're going to give it a shot.
Yeah, I can get it. Now I'm guessing Specialist is the incarnation of the Rogue.
Yeah. This I have to thank my friends for, because I have not played every class. I said there are a number of classes I just find boring. So what I tended to do is go to my friends who also play a lot of D&D and go, having played these classes, what do you think their problems are? And one person described the Rogue to me as, the Rogue feels like someone that has specialised in hiding. Like, if you consider how sneak attack works, it really wants you to stealth. The problem being that D&D stealth mechanics are not that good. Which is partially why a number of its subclasses then try to fix sneak attack. Or you get the new thing where they just don't move and they get advantage to give them sneak attack. But that then spurred the thought for me of, what if if you had a class that took the place of the Rogue, so it's all about being expertise and skills and all of that, but where you got to pick the skill that was a specialism. So if you treat the Rogue in D&D as someone who is specialised in stealth, you might have someone who's specialised in acrobatics, or specialised in skullduggery, or specialised in knowledge skill, and getting to play with that. So to do a sneak attack, one of the things we don't call it sneak attack, we call it specialist attack. But one of the things is you have to use your specialism skill. So if you want to go with sneaking like a rogue, you've got to hide. But it might be that you specialise in magical lore and you are fighting a dragon, at which point you would use your specialism skill to recall some knowledge about the dragon. And then you and your game guide can decide between you how long that benefit should last for. So instead of it just being I've used the skill, now I can use sneak attack, it's, for some skills it'll be, I've used the skill, I now for the rest of this encounter can just get my sneak attack. I don't need to keep reusing the skill. When what it really is me going, I use my knowledge to know this, or I use my ones like acrobatics would be more situational, because I'm using my acrobatics to get into a position to attack it from somewhere it normally isn't. But it's why a lot of the subclasses will recommend skills for specializations tied to them. I thought it was an interesting thing to play with, so I'd be interested to see what people think about it.
Yeah. Obviously, Warrior is the incarnation of Fighter. We've already kind of talked about that and how it's going to be working.
So its combat maneuvers. Its combat maneuvers work with, you have openers, general steps, variable steps that can be any other step, or a finisher step. And we have what we call flows. So you use an opener to start, you can then use your generals, and then use a finisher, which will then look back at how many actions you've used in that flow. So a flow can occur over many turns, which is why, as I say, it's kind of this thing where the fighter you get to kind of plan your turns and plan ahead for how you want your flow to go to do this thing. And then each of your subclasses, again, will give you unique actions. Yeah. It's like if you choose the Marshal, you get to do some Warlord-style actions. If you pick a Cataphract, you've got a bunch of actions that deal with being a knight.
Mm-hmm. And I know it would be tempting for someone to say that combat steps isn't far removed from the combos that you give the martial artist, but the way you're describing it, the analogy I'd probably use is the martial artist is Street Fighter, the warrior is Soul Calibur.
I've not played either of those games, so I can't really speak to that on fighting game terms, but
well,
it's definitely one where one is you will be reacting in the moment. You know all of the combo steps. You just kind of are trying to work out where to spend in the moment, whereas Warrior is.
Mm-hmm.
You know a limited number of your maneuvers. Your key decision making will be what order you place them in. What things do you set up to then cause later maneuvers to have a greater chance of success?
Mm-hmm. Which is what's been intended with the fighter compared to other archetypes of being the more practiced combatant, but because of this need to adhere to certain traditions, it's never been able to actually nail that down.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Well, that's the one thing. The joy of not using the word I am D&D is I can go, you know what, screw that tradition. Let's let's try something different.
Well,
we don't have.
I know some people will go with the whole expectations, but I've ranted on what I call design by gospel for the longest time, and have used the state of sim racing in video games as a warning of what happens when you are too slavish to traditions. Palladium is another example because they're using the same setup since the late 80s, even though it desperately needs a reboot. You know, just keep piling on and on to the point where you have the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But the last one on the class list is, of course, the World Speaker, which I'm guessing is akin to the Druid.
So the way, yes. So the way World Speaker works is you at level 1 will get to pick you get to bond with one of the 4 outer elements. You get to bond with earth, air, fire, water. And as you level, you will get to increase the level of bond with your current element and learn to bond with the others.
Mm-hmm.
And then that will buff your spell casting. So spells all have a spell tag. Slight correction to what I just said. Mm-hmm. Many spells have spell tags. So Fireball, for example, will have the fire tag. Ice Star will have cold. And what you get is you can, with having spells given spell tags, you can go, well, if a spell has this spell tag, you can modify it or you can add it to your spell list, which is what we do with World Shaper. Mm-hmm. Wild Shape is still a thing. So what we do is World Shaper gets an equivalent to Channel Divinity in Channel the World Soul. And you get to pick between a number of different things you can do. You can focus on learning about ley lines and using them to teleport across the world. You can focus on channeling and shaping the elements. You can focus on being a healer. You can wild shape. Mm-hmm. And there's an extra one you get where you can summon a familiar, but everyone gets that. And as you level, you will get to add more of that to your repertoire. Wild Shape does use templates. There is a land template, a sea template, and an air template. And depending on your size category, depends on how many hit points you have and what certain traits number is. And then you get customizations where you make it more like the animal you're actually turning into.
Yeah, I can get that.
I didn't want the 5e thing where it's just I need to now go through the monster manual to find which creature do I actually want to turn into. It's like, no, just here's a template. If you want to be little, you'll have less hit points than someone who is big. And you can add some things to make it a bit more like the animal you want. And if there isn't a customization there, make one that better suits the animal you want, but use the customizations to get that thing rather than just going, I want to be that, use that stat block. And yeah, its big thing is kind of playing with that elemental bond and growing in power of the elements while also having this aspect of getting to do things like traditional druids do, like wild shape.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, from what I saw with some of the different classes and some of the other materials, it also looks like you're doing more of an action point system when it comes to action economy, as opposed to standard bonus, all that kind of thing.
Yep.
Oh.
We are a 3 action point system game, but as you level in certain classes, you may get more action points. One thing that differentiates warrior from fighter is all the other martials will get extra attack. Warrior just gets more action points to let it do more maneuvers in a turn.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm fine with, since the 5e warrior doubled down way too much on extra attack when so many other classes were getting extra attack at least once. So having that trade-off is certainly nice. And since you hinted at challenge rating, when it comes to the monster end of things, is challenge rating still going to be a thing, or do you have something else planned?
Currently, we will still use challenge rating. When I finalised it a bit more, we will see. Monster design is interesting. It is not something I've put too much thought into yet. It's something I've been testing the waters with different bits. I do want to kind of lean back onto the 4th edition style of giving monsters. In the same way we have spell tags, having monster tags, so you will have minions, you will have soldiers, you will have leaders, and those tags will help you work out, 1, do you want them in the encounter, and 2, what kind of effects they may have. Not opportunity attacks is not something everyone has. Only the warrior gets it by default. Everyone else has to either get everyone else has to get fighting style for it. And with monsters, only elite monsters will get fighting styles.
Yeah.
Will get opportunity attacks to try and keep that mobility going.
Would elites be the equivalent of 4th edition solos?
I am not 100% sure. One thing, we do have solo monster encounters. We differentiate between 2 kinds of encounter. There's your regular encounter, and there's what we call a critical engagement. This was inspired by my playing of the Fate system, which is when you would die in a regular encounter, I hand it to the player. I go, right, you have got the required number of degrees of the wounded condition. Your character at this point should die. You will get a choice. You can either choose to die, or you can come up with a narrative reason that you are no longer in the encounter. Either an NPC pulls you away, be them good or bad, or you get pushed off a cliff. I don't care what. You can choose to not die to the regular goblin mooks. Or you can just choose to die. That's always an acceptable answer.
Yeah.
Critical engagements, which are your big boss fights and your solo fights, they are death is on the table. There is no out on this one. This is the encounter where things get serious. And it includes things like these kind of monsters aren't affected by certain conditions, so they cannot be stunned. But if you would apply the stun condition, they get dazed instead or suffer another effect. So you're still doing something, you're just not necessarily making the fight turn into oh look, we've made the boss do nothing, now we're just going to hit him until the sack of hit points drops to 0.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And so Solo's back and forth edition were monsters that were meant to take on a party by themselves. Things like dragons, things like beholders, things like some of the bigger demons like Orcus would be considered solos.
Yeah, then we would definitely, they would definitely get things like attack of opportunity. I'm currently trying to think about how I want to do monsters. Admittedly, this is partially my wargamer side coming out. Currently, what I've been milling about is trying to make it that monsters are more than just a combat encounter, because when you look through the monster manual, there's often a very little lore blurb, and then there's your combat stat block. But the thing is, there's a lot of information in that combat stat block that's also useful for out-of-combat things that really doesn't need to be there when you're running a combat encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I've been debating using is having effectively for a monster, you'll have a lore section which will include, because we have a study action, a table for, depending on what you roll for study, this is what you learn. A combat stat block and a social stat block, so that when you're in combat, you only have to refer to the combat stat block. Nice, simple, easy. When you are dealing with this entity on a more social level, especially for like devils, demons, angels, that kind of thing, here are the social things you need to know. Here are some concepts that can be invoked. Here are some kind of example of goals and things that help you as the game guide in the moment know how I should be role-playing this character, but also gives things to the players mechanically to interact with. And then for certain monsters, the other things I've been looking at is having a loot table and a harvest table, because obviously with a crafting system you need material, and so you need harvest tables for that. So monsters are a bit involved, but I haven't quite got there yet.
Oh, yeah, I can certainly get that. And I will definitely be looking forward to seeing how 20-Sided Adventures develops. And for those watching this on YouTube, I did put a link to the itch.io page for the project in its description, so be sure to follow that if you want to keep abreast of whatever expansions or whatever updates come along. It is a work in progress, obviously. And thank you, Aron, for taking the time out of your schedule and braving time zone hell to come all the way to my temple.
Thank you for inviting me. The project this early on, I was not expecting it, so it's nice to chat with people about stuff. I enjoy talking about games.
And of course, anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, thank you very much for the offer.
Yeah. And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Thank you.